And now, please give a warm welcome to the host of Broadway Buzz, Mr. Joe Gary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, and welcome to Broadway Buzz, and welcome to Shucked. I really like to say that. Shucked! It's a punch. It really jumps out. And of course, so does the advertising. I mean, not since Phantom of the Opera have we had a show where the marketing has made such a profound impression on the show. When this show opened in New York in 2023 at the Nederlander Theater, no one knew anything about it. They didn't know the composer or lyricist. This is an unknown show, an original show. It's not based on something. And so the end result is there was very little information, and the producer kept it that way. When the media would contact him and say, "What's the show about?" he would say, "Corn," and that was it. And so, about a week before the show started previews, every taxi cab in New York had that wonderful graphic that was appearing everywhere. It was on every bus that was going through Times Square. In Times Square, there were 30-foot high ads for Shucked. I mean, the title is attention-grabbing, as was the media. The other thing that happened was the producer reduced the price of previews, which is, when I grew up in the theater, I started going to the theater, I blush to tell you this, but I could only see second acts because I'd sneak in for the second act right in New York. But finally, when I had a little money, I could literally buy a ticket, but I'd always have to go to previews because they were much less expensive. Well, that's long past. We know now that if you want to see Othello in New York, you have to pay $900 for an orchestra seat, and if you want to see George Clooney in New York, you also have to pay $900 to see him. So what was happening with this show is they had very inexpensive preview tickets, and they advertised a great deal on TikTok. So they got a very young audience interested in this show. It sounded funky, the ad was unusual, it wasn't the traditional Broadway ad. So a lot of young people flocked to the previews. In fact, the previews sold out because the ticket price was so greatly reduced. What happened very quickly is that the show became a cult show. And people started arriving dressed in corn husks. I saw one here opening night, so I kept congratulating them for having the nerve to wear it in Cleveland. But in New York, a lot of people did this, and it was sort of like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And jaded New Yorkers were saying, "Oh, give me a break. This is a show that probably should have happened off-Broadway, but certainly not on Broadway." Well, in any case, when it opened, it basically got rave reviews, save for the New York Times, of course. And the end result was it started very quickly selling out. And happily, it had a very distinguished run in New York. It's an enormously funny show. But aside from that, it has wonderful country western music. As you know, we have a long tradition of country western musicals. We've had Big River, we've had 110 in the Shade, we've had Calamity Jane, the Will Rogers Follies, Diamond Studs. So there's a lot of example of country western music in the Broadway musical. But this is really quite special. And the composer and lyricist, who are Brandy Clark and Shane McAnally, are really very distinguished in Nashville. They've had a tremendous record of success there. They have lots of Grammy Awards. Shane has over 50 #1 hit songs in the country western charts. So they're distinguished in their musical world, but not certainly in the Broadway world. Happily, they would be nominated for Tony Awards. They didn't win, but they did have the distinction of at least being Tony nominated, as they should. The score is really extraordinary. The story is a very simplistic story. It's a story about a little town called Cobb County. I really should have an accent. Cobb County, that's where it is. Okay, so it takes place in Cobb County, and it's a little town that's surrounded by corn. And the people who live in Cobb County have never left Cobb County, and no one has ever come to visit. So this is really like Brigadoon. And you're going to start to see a lot of other references to Music Man. There's a big musical number when this grifter from the outside comes in, trying to hoodwink the simple residents of Cobb County, and he's very much like the Music Man in the title show, Music Man. So you'll see a lot of parallels in this regard. But it really is a very extraordinary and delightful tale. We're very familiar with the phrase farm to table. Well, this is farm to fable. We remember fables really started with the origin of man. It was part of our oral tradition to pass on. We passed on fairy tales, we passed on histories of the tribe, and we passed on fables. You remember, a fable means you give lifelike characteristics to inanimate objects. So you'd have talking trees, for example, or animals. So Disney would capitalize on this, of course, with all of his Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse characters that he would create. But this is an ancient idea, the idea of the fable. And that's really what this is. And when I won't describe the story any more to you than that, other than the protagonist of the story is a divine young girl named Maisie. And of course, she's in love with a young boy named Bo. And what happens, they're about to get married, and the corn crop fails. Corn is everything in Cobb County, and she has to leave Cobb County. No one's left Cobb County because she has to find someone who's going to come back, an outsider who's going to come back and help save the day. That's primarily the story, and we go, oh, this is really simplistic. But let me just tell you, what happens in the story, you get very caught up in the characters, and you get very caught up in the storyline, and it really becomes a story about community, about a need for loving one another and understanding one another. It's a story about building walls. Does that sound familiar? It's a story about trying to live in isolation. Does that sound familiar? And really what it is we discover we really need one another to survive. So it really becomes this very sort of touching story. It becomes sort of metaphoric. And it's a story about the need to reach out, to love one another, to care about one another. Listen to one of the brilliant songs in the second act called Friends. There are two cousins who fight, Maisie and her cousin Lulu, and they fight, and then they sing this beautiful song about friendship. And it's a very touching, delightful work. It sneaks up on you. Because it's so loaded with comedy. There's a joke every 30 seconds. So you're going to have enough material to go to the next 50 parties and have jokes to tell. The problem that happens with this show is the jokes come so fast, you can't absorb them all. So keep in mind, the one thing I am going to tell you on your drive home, when you say to your partner in the car, what jokes do you remember? They're going to be all the raunchy ones. I can guarantee that. So keep in mind, this show previewed in Salt Lake City, Utah. Because keep in mind, this was a period when we had the AIDS issue, and they couldn't find anywhere to try the show out. They had originally planned on presenting it at the Kennedy Center, and they couldn't do it. They had to cancel, and they had to wait 3 years. And by the time they were able to get back in the mix of things, they had, they did have the Nederlander Theater in place in New York, but they had nowhere to preview the show. So they went to Salt Lake City. And I mean, this is very red territory. And some of the jokes are a little on the raunchy side, and some of the issues, when you get beyond the allegory and you start seeing that it really is a kind of political statement. You wonder how they survived in Salt Lake City, but they did. Okay, so when the show opened, then it had great success. I'm happy to report that the national tour is playing to capacity. Also, it's a 30-city tour. Also, in the next 2 weeks, it's going to open in London at Regent's Park, which is an outdoor theater. And I can guarantee you the Brits are going to love this show. They love old stand-up comedy. It's right out of the pantomimes. And they love all the stereotypic characters you're going to see. So they really will embrace this show. So happily, that's going to be playing in London. And when it's a success, which I'm certain it will be, it'll move to the West End. It's also scheduled next season in Australia, and then it will explode in the world. It's a really delightful show. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. How did all of this happen? Let me introduce you to the father of all this, named Robert Horn. Robert Horn is a wonderful comic writer. He had a long career on television. Probably his most famous work was Designing Women. But look up his bio in the program, and you will recognize countless television shows that you have loved over the years. He's like the Mel Brooks of today. He's had this wonderful career. When you watch his interviews on YouTube, I mean, every line is funny, and that's what he does in this show. He built this show. He tells this story like a fable, and we have two storytellers, as you have in fables. I mean, remember, the idea of the fable came from passing on the oral tradition. And so whether you sat under a banyan tree in India and heard a fable told by a holy man, or you were in the desert hearing someone tell you a story, the idea of the storyteller is very important. Watch how wonderfully they're developed in this story. They have great comic lines. They're two very contemporary young people. They're performed brilliantly, and they do these zingers with great skill. So in any case, how this happened is Robert Horn was called to Nashville and called to the Grand Ole Opry. The time is 2013. And the Grand Ole Opry owned the rights to Hee Haw, the television show. Most of us will not admit that we watched Hee Haw. But I have to tell you, it played for 25 years, so somebody was watching Hee Haw. And I have to tell you, I blush to tell you, it took up my youth. I watched it with great delight. But in any case, they wanted Robert Horn to create a musical based on Hee Haw. And so they said, we'll arrange for you to have any of the great country western writers work with you. And so he auditioned people, and he fell in love with Brandy Clark and Shane McAnally. Brandy Clark I'm mad about her albums. She has this very soulful voice. She plays the guitar and sings. But what's really important about her is, while she is a country western writer, she really writes character songs. So long before she ever found her way to Broadway, she was destined to do that because she writes brilliant character songs. So her work stands by itself. And then Shane has had over 50 major hits, #1 hits, on the country western charts. And they like to work together. So they're both listed as composer, and they're both listed as lyricist. But what's even more important is they loved working with Robert Horn. And they all had the same kind of sense of humor, which is very important. So they set off in 2013 to write what would be an abandoned musical that would be called Moonshine. The subtitle of it was That Hee Haw Musical. In any case, they worked on it for 2 years. They presented it in 2015 at the Dallas Theater Center. It played to capacity. It had mixed reviews. The critics loved the music. The critics thought the humor was very funny, but they also thought that it was a kind of show that was too provincial, that could never find success in New York. So basically the show died then. And these three artists who so loved working together were sort of bereft. So after about 6 months of not being together and not working together in this very creative way that they did, they all reconnected and they said, let us proceed with this, but let's write a whole new musical. So they threw out Moonshine. They kept 3 of the songs, they kept 2 of the characters, and they would rewrite the show that we would know as Shucked. But obviously now they had to find a new producer. And so this would be a very important step. They sought out Mike Bosner. This was a perfect choice. Mike Bosner had had success in New York with Sunset Boulevard and Beautiful, the musical. So he was skilled. He also had worked at the Muni Grand Opera for 5 years. So he had a lot of skill in putting together new projects. And he would serve, as you saw, I mean, already he'd picked out a wonderful advertising campaign, but he gave these artists the greatest gifts of all. He gave them a new director, and the director is Jack O'Brien. Now, let me introduce Jack O'Brien for you. For 50 years, Jack O'Brien has been one of America's greatest directors. He's probably the American director that I admire most. For 25 years, he worked at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego. Remember, the Old Globe is built after Shakespeare's theater, so he would present classical work. So he's one of the few Americans who's really skilled in presenting Shakespeare's work, equal to the work that's done in London at the National Theatre, for example. But also Jack O'Brien was very skilled in developing new musicals. And also he was very skilled in developing offbeat plays. Most recently, he just directed Roommates on Broadway with Patti LuPone, and it had great success, a small 2-character play. So in any case, just by my indicating to you the fact that the 3 Tony Awards he won one for Hairspray. And remember, Hairspray was a very revolutionary drag musical that dealt with Harvey Fierstein starred in it, and it was a remarkable camp musical. So he had great skill in developing that kind of form. He would win a Tony Award for Henry IV, Part 1, which is one of Shakespeare's most difficult plays to produce. And keep in mind, it's certainly not one of his most popular plays. But not only was it a great success in San Diego, but it would go to New York, where it would win a Tony Award. And then his 3rd Tony Award was for an 8-hour epic called Coast of Utopia, written by Tom Stoppard, which is a very esoteric, very complicated play about Russia, an extraordinary work. I saw the version that was done at the National Theatre in London, and then I also saw the Lincoln Center version that Jack O'Brien did. Both were equally powerful and compelling. So you see the great range he has as a director. So what he's able to bring to this, by the time he enters this collaboration, the group had already basically written the story and written the music. But Jack O'Brien would help to reshape everything. In his notes, he said one of the first things that was wrong is the show was so campy, it was so fey, that it would just sort of float away. It didn't really have any substance or base. And so what he wanted to do was to bring a level of reality to the fantasy. That's hard to do. I mean, when you have stock characters like Maisie and Bo and Grandpa and Peanut, it's hard to give them substance. But watch how successfully he does that in the show. So one of the first things Jack O'Brien said when he was critiquing the work that had been done, he said, you got to throw out the opening number, and you've got to write a new number that's going to be called Corn. So watch for that as you watch the opening number of the show. It does everything an opening number should do. It tells us what the show is going to be about. You're sitting there saying, now I'm going to sit for 2 hours and watch a show about corn. Well, I guarantee you it will delight you with the way they tell the story. Everything is in the telling of the story, remember. Okay, so what I want to do for the next few minutes is to show you how Jack O'Brien would shape this show and turn it into something that has much more substance. Again, this comes from all those years of learning how to do the farce scenes in Shakespeare, of learning how to do the camp scenes in Hairspray, etc. So, I mean, this is a director with great skill. Jack has written 2 great books. One is called Jack Be Nimble. And if you want to read about the director and the contemporary theater, it's a book I really recommend. It's very breezy, it's easy to read, it's gossipy, it's about every famous actor in America because Jack worked with all of them, and it's a delightful work. It's sort of equal to Moss Hart's Act One. But then I want to focus for a moment on his book on directing that's called Jack in the Box, where he talks about how he works as a director. And let me just point out some of the stages of being a director. You're most familiar, of course, with the idea of the director working with the actor. We understand that. But let me go back and show you all of the other roles that the director has to play that Jack O'Brien does brilliantly. Okay, we start with the idea of concept. We say that the director, as he talks about in his book, is the major interpreter of the work. So what happened in this process? All of these artists worked together to get the script in order. And keep in mind, they literally worked on the script until 2 hours before it opened on Broadway. But beyond that, at one point, the director has to pull himself away from that collaborative experience and focus on his role as a director. And the first stage is to be the director as interpreter. And he has to interpret the script. And he has to do it, he has to start by dealing with what is the time, what is the place, and what is the action that happens. So in that period of pre-production, he has to work with the designers long before they've cast the show, long before they're in rehearsal. And he has to come up with what is the set going to be like, and what is the atmosphere going to be like, and what are we suggesting? I mean, keep in mind, we're dealing with a fable here. We're dealing with an imaginary place like Brigadoon. We're dealing with Cobb County. So notice when you walk in the theater, you will see this large shell of a barn. It's very evocative. We see through the slats and we see the sky in the background, but it's a wonderful sort of shell, and then there is an empty stage. So this comes from his concept of the show. He would work very carefully with the designers to shape that idea of time, place, atmosphere. A magical place, a whimsical place, a fantasy place where this sort of fable has to take place. The next step the director has is he casts the show, and watch, in this case, how brilliantly the choices he has made in matching the actor with the character. I mean, we're dealing with very slim characters. I mean, Grandpa, Peanut, we don't have a lot of substance there. Everybody tells endless jokes. So somehow you have to find a way of giving substance to the character. Watch how wonderfully he has cast the show. Especially focus on the character of Lulu. Lulu is a cousin in the show. She has one of the great show-stopping numbers in the first act. About 2/3 of the way through the first act, Lulu will belt out this song called Independently Owned. It's an extraordinary song. It was cast but with a non-binary actor. So in this case, it's a female character cast with a non-binary performer, and watch the brilliant way that role is brought to life. And Lulu takes on great power in the show. I mean, again, that number she sings in the first act is a very complicated number with a lot of musical twists and turns. It's, a great show-stopping number and brilliantly done. But watch how it's executed by this actor. The actor who played the show in New York would win the Tony Award, and the young non-binary performer who's performing the show here would also deserve a Tony for the extraordinary work that's being done in the show. Okay, so we know that what he's going to do is bring substance to the character. Okay, the next thing we want to think of in terms of the director is like a painter. In that he creates a total environment. He works with the designers, he works with the costume designers, he works with the lighting designers, but he has to create compositions. So be conscious when you watch the show today of this big empty space. It's the shell, it's almost like an amphitheater. But then watch how they move a few simple things around the stage to create compositions the way a painter would. You know that in a painting, a great painting, your eye is pulled through the whole painting. You look for the vanishing point, what pulls you to stage right to stage left, what pulls you through the painting. And it's all about focus and composition, and these are the technical skills that a director has to have. But watch how brilliantly this is done with a few barrels, a few boards, and a few stalks of corn. And they keep reconfiguring the space. And it gives you a totally different atmospheric sense. Sometimes you feel like you're in a very intimate little space. Sometimes you're in the cavernous space of the whole barn. But watch how cleverly it is done. Especially watch for the musical number in the second act that is a direct takeoff on Hee Haw, and the number is called Hee Haw, and it's a delight. It's right out of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and everyone is dancing on boards and jumping from barrel to barrel. Very cleverly done, and great wit in the telling of the story. Okay, so then we think of the director as a sculptor in that he deals in 3-dimension. And just as a painting gives you a sense of perspective, the actual moving of the characters on stage gives you that sculpted feeling of where you're looking, why your eye is drawn to stage right or stage left. Start to notice that a little bit. I mean, this show is so beguiling and so entertaining, you just get lost in it. But just suddenly let something trigger in the back of your brain and say, okay, why am I looking over here? Why am I looking up center? Why am I looking at this little group of people down left? It's all because of the director functioning as a sort of sculptor. Then I want you to think of the conductor, as the director as a conductor. And when you go to the symphony, you see the conductor controlling the rhythmic ideas of the show. But in this case, when so much of the show is based on humor, and so much of the show is based on jokes, a joke is, there's a statement, the statement is complicated, and then you have the punchline and the laugh. And the aim is to be as spare as possible. We've all had that experience of hearing a joke and thinking it's the funniest joke we've ever heard, and then we go to tell it and we screw it up. And we make it too long, we add too many details, we don't pause in the right place, we don't hit the punchline, and therefore we don't get, we don't cash in on the joke. The money part doesn't happen in the joke. So in this case, one of the great jobs that Jack O'Brien has in this show is how do you, the major element in this show, the other major character in this show is the audience. And watch how the audience laughs at this show. they get very big laughs. Almost every character has wonderful jokes and wonderful one-liners that pulls you into the humor, but watch how the audience swells in its humor. You know, we go back to the idea that 16 million years ago, when our great ancestors, the great apes, discovered that if they tickled one another, we would laugh. That is the basis of humor. Watch the tickling that happens in the show. Watch how they set up a joke, how it's quickly compounded, and then they cash in on the punchline. If you wait too long and the audience gets the punchline before it's said on stage, obviously that's a disaster. If it comes and someone steps on the punchline, that's a disaster. So just be sensitive to this rhythmic flow that happens. And there is this extraordinary energy that happens in the show. So you're in for a wonderful treat. You have a director at the top of his game, 50 years of experience. You have one of the funniest writers working today. And then you have two of my favorite country western writers giving you an extraordinary score with memorable songs. Listen to some of the solos that the young hero has, who's in love with Maisie, and Maisie's delightful songs. All of it is a great delight. You're in for a great treat, and I know you will be shocked. Thank you.